Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Add to the violence that has become Lebanon, a car bomb today in a residential section of Muslim West Beirut. 14 people killed, 84 wounded. The damage from that 300-pound bomb was complete. And so too, says the United States, was the damage inflicted on Syrian military positions during a big U.S. airstrike yesterday. But the American cost was high. 1 pilot killed, 1 captured, 2 planes destroyed, and 8 U.S. Marines killed in later shelling. Our coverage begins with Martha Teichner in Beirut.
Today's car bomb explosion destroyed an apartment building. It killed civilians. It had no apparent political target and remains unexplained. But it serves as a metaphor for all the hideous, unexpected incidents that occur in Beirut. Isolated acts that alone are unrelated, together add insidiously to the kind of tension that breeds each new eruption of political violence here. The explosion came as the U.S. peacekeeping force recovered from intense shelling at Beirut International Airport overnight, widely believed to have been a retaliation carried out by factions in support of Syria after the United States bombed Syrian-held territory in eastern Lebanon.
The initial fire was, we thought, one of our usual firefights just outside our lines, and we were taking spillover. It became obvious within the first 10 or 15 minutes that it was not spillover, they were shooting at us.
The Marines took fire from as close as 300 feet. The 8 men who died and the 2 who were wounded were hit by a single mortar round on top of the position where they were fighting together.
We're heavily engaged, and these men were up there engaged when they took the round and suffered the casualties.
The latest casualties raise again the question of how vulnerable the Marines are. Even in their bunkers, they are sitting ducks against shelling from the open fields around the airport and from the hills, strongholds for the Druze and Shiite militias, which consider the United States as much their enemy as they do the Lebanese army. The menacing presence of 6 fleet warships just offshore, bristling with the big guns they turned on the hills last night, is not much help to the Marines when the men attacking them have all but penetrated their positions on foot. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Beirut.
The U.S. claims the strikes were very successful. 4 anti-aircraft batteries hit at Deir al-Harb, 7 plus an ammunition dump at Hamana, a fire control radar and missile site at Fallujah.
Technically, it was successful in the sense that they went after certain batteries that fired on them and they hit them.
It will take more reconnaissance flights to tell whether the targets that were hit were actually destroyed, and if so, whether the Syrians are moving up more anti-aircraft batteries to take their place. It will also take more reconnaissance flights to test the Pentagon claim that Sunday's raid achieved its objective of preventing any more attacks on U.S. planes. There have been no such flights since Sunday's raid. On that raid, the American pilots ran into intense anti-aircraft fire, hundreds of rounds of artillery, and about 50 SAM missiles. They were flying Vietnam-era planes, but Navy pilots here don't blame the planes.
It is not the fastest airplane, but it is as fast as it needs to be.
Some Pentagon officials say that given the intensity of the fire, they were lucky they didn't lose more planes. That was scant consolation for the parents of the 1 pilot killed.
Mark always said a prayer first, that God would go with him, and maybe he's lucky when he's up there, and he's never going to hurt again.
Pilots' lives would not have been risked if the Navy had called on the battleship New Jersey, whose 16-inch guns could have reached the same targets. But the New Jersey was never used, apparently because it lacks the accuracy of an airstrike. Even when later that same day the Marines at Beirut Airport were shelled by Druze artillery, the New Jersey's guns remained silent. Pentagon officials do not believe the airport shelling was in retaliation for the air raid. Whatever the motive, the death of 8 Marines, despite precautions taken following last month's bombing, dramatizes just how exposed the Marines are in their present position. Defense Secretary Weinberger suggested today the Marines might have to move.
There is always additional possibilities of different locations for them.
Behind the threat to the lives of American soldiers and airmen in Lebanon lies the danger of a confrontation with Syria's chief backer, the Soviet Union. On Sunday, while U.S. aircraft carriers launched their strike against Syrian positions, sonar operators were tracking 2 unidentified, presumably Soviet submarines shadowing the American fleet. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
who makes the best-built American cars. Based on National Highway Traffic Safety recall data over the last 2 years, Chrysler does, because Chrysler had the lowest percent of recalls. And only Chrysler has the confidence to back the cars it builds for 5 years or 50,000 miles, with protection on the engine, powertrain, and against outer body rust-through. Based on recalls alone, Chrysler makes the best-built American cars, and with 550 protection, they're not only the best built, they're the best backed.
Mommy! Come on, you promised.
Sorry, had to practice.
Yvonne, how do you do it? Tennis, family, everything.
Isn't easy. And after Morgan was born, my doctor told me I had iron-poor blood.
You?
Biggest nutritional problem we women have. Now I protect myself, eat right, and take Geritol every day.
Geritol is iron-rich, great protection against iron-poor blood. Iron is Geritol's middle name.
Mommy?
Coming.
I'm going to get Geritol.
It's great protection against iron-poor blood.
Syria said today that the captured U.S. Navy pilot, Lieutenant Robert Goodman of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, is considered a prisoner of war, and that he will be released, quote, like in all wars, when the war is over. Lieutenant Goodman was said to be in excellent conditions, in good health, suffering no injury of any kind, unquote. Lieutenant Goodman is believed to be the first American captured in combat since the Vietnam War. From Damascus, Alan Pizzi reports that yesterday's first-time ever military encounter between the United States and Syria is being hailed as a Syrian victory.
There is a feeling here that far from being a deterrent to Syria's Middle East ambitions, the American raid was a propaganda coup for the nation that promotes itself as leader of the Arab cause. The state-run media has been making much of the fact that the Syrian army took on the world's most powerful military machine and scored, and the raid cost Syria very little. Observers here say the Syrian army learned some hard lessons in recent years from the Israeli Air Force. That experience, coupled with the latest Soviet weaponry, has created the impression that the Syrians will not be put off by a few raids and will hit back again. The Marines are the obvious targets. Washington has all but accused the Syrians of directing Drew's gunners against Marine positions. But Drew's leaders say any shelling on the Marines is accidental and not the result of Syrian orders.
Politically speaking, we are allied now, but we don't cooperate. They have their military presence, I have my own military presence.
There are at least 30,000 Syrian troops in Lebanon and more than 200,000 at home, so they can sustain small losses. The more they lose, said one observer here, the more Arab support they gain. But there are also signs that the Syrians are worried about escalating the sequence of attack and reprisal. In a rare move, a few hours after Sunday's incident, foreign ambassadors were summoned to the foreign ministry. They were told Syria warned the U.S. 2 weeks ago that reconnaissance flights would be fired on. European diplomats were asked to use their connections with Washington to urge restraint. Said one diplomatic source, the Syrians gave the distinct impression of being concerned about widening the conflict. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Damascus.
At a Washington news conference, Secretary of State Schultz said the U.S. airstrikes were ordered simply because the Syrians shot at American reconnaissance planes. He made no mention of any advance warning from Syria that the planes might come under fire unless the reconnaissance flights stopped. But he said the flights were no secret.
We felt, and since we had told in advance everybody, including the Syrians, about these reconnaissance flights, that they were purely defensive, there was no attack connected with them, that we should fire back at those who fired on us. And it's just as simple as that.
The Secretary turned away suggestions the flight meant the United States was now trying to resolve the Lebanon crisis by military means, but he warned that U.S. forces would protect themselves while a diplomatic solution was sought.
I think the main point, however, to be driven home is that we will support ourselves, we will defend ourselves.
With most congressmen back home for the holiday recess, there was little Capitol Hill reaction, but some criticism did surface, and it was sharp.
I think the president ought to bring everybody that has an American uniform on back and do it now, because we are headed for war.
Although the administration's public line was that the airstrikes were a tit-for-tat response against Syria, some officials said privately that the strikes were also a signal that Syria's continuing presence in Lebanon would be more costly in the future. The problem now, however, is that with 2 American planes lost in the attack, it may be the Syrians who feel they've taught the United States a lesson rather than the other way around. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, the State Department.
Nicholas, the golfer, can't afford to miss these.
Jack Nicholas, the businessman, can't afford to miss important calls either. With my Unidan Extendophone, I don't, because it's cordless. Nan likes its go-anywhere convenience, too. The boys like the intercom feature, and Barbara likes the automatic dialing. There's something to like in every Extendophone. That's why it's the most popular cordless phone in America.
Why not number one, Uniden Extendophone?
The first time ever I saw your face.
He'll always remember the first time he saw you, because the precious emollients in oil of Olay revived the radiance and softened tiny dry wrinkle lines.
The first time ever I saw your face.
Oil of Olay. It can help you look younger, too.
U.S. and Soviet negotiators in Geneva tomorrow will hold another session of the long-running START talks aimed at reducing intercontinental nuclear missiles. But a trio of Soviet officials indicated in Moscow today that those negotiations could be suspended as the medium-range missile talks already are. The threat came in an extraordinary Western-style news conference, one that failed to shed any light on the whereabouts of Yuri Andropov. Don McNeil reports from Moscow.
The purpose of the news conference was to discuss the American deployment of medium-range missiles in Europe and Soviet countermeasures. However, Western correspondents used the occasion to ask about the whereabouts and condition of Soviet leader Yuri Andropov, who hasn't been seen since August 18th.
Now, Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov is recovering, and he is dealing extensively with the party, state affairs, and with all the affairs of the Council of Defense.
On the subject of Euromissiles, Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, chief of the defense staff, gave a detailed explanation of 4 years of offer and counteroffer between the two superpowers, leading to the Soviet decision to walk out at Geneva. The blame, Ogarkov said, is entirely the fault of the United States, which is attempting to place first-strike weapons in Europe. The West European allies of America, he charged, particularly the Germans, have much to fear by agreeing to deployment. The strategic arms talks, said Ogarkov, could suffer as a result of the present climate of relations. Deputy Foreign Minister Georgy Kornienko knocked down some recent Western reports that the Soviets might reconsider their walkout at Geneva.
To continue the negotiations under such conditions when the U.S. has started the deployment of its missiles would signify to contribute to the deceit of the world public, and we are not going to engage in that.
According to Western diplomats, the news conference makes it clear the Soviets are doing their best to lay the blame for Geneva at America's doorstep, because they are still out to win over European public opinion, and are now using fear more than ever to accomplish that goal. Don McNeil, CBS News, Moscow.
That Soviet news conference also touched on the American and Syrian conflict in Lebanon. Party spokesman Zamyatin calling the U.S. airstrike yesterday an aggressive act. And he said Moscow would not allow its Syrian ally to go unaided.
We condemn it, and we are going to render assistance and help to those who are conducting struggle against the U.S. and Israeli aggression in these areas.
The escalating violence involving American forces in Lebanon is the subject of tonight's commentary by Bill Moyers. Bill?
Dan, the original deployment of our troops in Lebanon was understandable for being simple, to help end the Israeli siege of Beirut by overseeing the exit of the defeated PLO. But increasingly, we have taken sides with the government of Amin Gemayel, whose Muslim opponents see him as representative of the right-wing Christians. When artillery from U.S. ships was used to support the Lebanese army, religious fanatics who don't like us anyway took vengeance on the Marines. By now, it was apparent that Syria was encouraging much of the trouble. Lebanon was for centuries part of Syria, and with Soviet help, Damascus has been able to become once again a dominant force there. So the rationale for our presence was up to notch, part of a strategy to make the Syrians think twice. But in fact, the Marines are too small a force to matter practically, and air power is of limited value when conditions on the ground do not permit its advantages to be followed up. Those Lebanese extremists allied with Syria seem not a whit intimidated by American technology. They even appear to welcome our use of it as one more excuse to increase their own violence against the Marines hunkered helplessly at the Beirut airport. This is the trap of Lebanon, where violence meets violence. It's why, for all the talk of cooperation in Washington last week, the Israelis are not likely to help us militarily. Having experienced the quagmire at great cost, they're not eager to plunge in again. Some of our own military officials were reported today to have had doubts about the raids of the weekend. They've seen their quagmires too, where they have nothing to show for an endless, shifting policy except the casualties.
It's the magic of the season. It's the best of times to be at Kmart.
Where can you find just what they always wanted at just what you wanted to pay? You guessed it. This year, more than ever, you'll find Christmas at Kmart.
We've got it, and we've got it good. This Christmas, Kmart, we've got it, and we've got it good.
Not long ago, at his home in France, wine expert Christopher Stevens invited friends to guess the price of a special American Burgundy.
Très bon.
Qu'en pensez-vous?
65.
They guessed between $8 and $10.
70.
How much was the wine from America? You already know.
14 francs.
Because it's the same red wine you're probably drinking now.
14 francs.
The hearty Burgundy of Ernest and Julio Gallo.
C'est incroyable.
From America's premier vintners. All the best.
In what was likely the longest long-distance call yet, President Reagan in Washington, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl in Europe, and the Space Shuttle crew in orbit all took part in today's first-of-its-kind conference call. Together they turned Space Lab into a space gab. For their part, the shuttle crew didn't just talk a blue streak, they showed one, the deep blue, visible between the cotton-puffed clouds of the Earth below. Among today's discoveries, that methane and carbon dioxide gases can be found at altitudes much higher above the Earth than anyone thought. And way beyond the Earth, readings from the remnants of an exploded star, showing that, in this case at least, star stuff includes a mixture of iron, silicon, and sulfur. Officials said 6 men died today and 5 were injured when fires swept through a home for the mentally retarded in Cincinnati. Witnesses said the multi-alarm fire broke out shortly after dawn and whipped through the 3-story house as residents slept. Most of the dead apparently were killed by smoke inhalation. Officials were investigating the possibility of arson. The victims had been transferred from an aging state institution to the house a year ago to bring them closer to their homes. Suicide. It's been called the savage god. By one estimate, there was a 120% increase in the suicide rate among American adolescents between 1960 and 1980. That fearsome toll among the young is widely publicized. But Steve Croft investigated the fact that suicide, the savage god, is no respecter of age.
Hi, this is Bea Baxter.
She was a headstrong woman years ahead of her time. Broadcaster, teacher, organizer, wife, mother, writer. At age 71 and in good health, she wrote her last letter, a suicide note to her children. If life is good, it must be maintained, she wrote. If it ceased to be so, why inflict it on those I love so much?
She was not forgiving of her own aging process. And we in the family would see her a little bit down at times. She didn't want us to go through it, but I don't think she wanted to go through it even more so.
Nearly 5,000 elderly people will take their own lives this year. It's sad and depressing, but it's not uncommon. The highest suicide risk in the country is a white male in his 80s.
Although older people make up not quite 12% of the population, they account for somewhere between 20 and 25% of reported suicides each year.
There are many reasons for it. Gerontologists say it's usually triggered by some sense of loss, the loss of a loved one, the loss of status, the loss of mobility.
They may be confronted by a hopeless illness, and they're horrified at the thought of leaving their spouse or family financially bankrupt.
In the case of one South Florida couple, it was the fear of nursing homes and the thought of being separated. One day last summer, they got all dressed up, laid out their funeral clothes on a bed, and went for a long ride in the country with a revolver they'd purchased the week before. Then Cecil Saunders shot his wife of 60 years and turned the gun on himself. They left a suicide note saying it seemed like the only solution to growing old.
The most common pattern involves no note at all because there's nobody to read it as far as the people are concerned.
Isolation is another cause of elderly suicide. Joe McCloskey was a veteran, a taxi driver, a gas station attendant. For 12 years, he lived alone in a small Miami apartment.
He was 65 years of age, and about 6 months before his death, he had been robbed at the gas station, refused to go back to work anymore. When we examined the scene, he was seated on a bed. The gun was right by his feet. He had no family to speak of, at least none in Florida. He left everything to his landlady.
It amounted to 9 cents, some magazines, and a black and white TV set. Joe McCloskey was buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery.
Hello?
Good morning, Marion?
Yes.
Marion, how are you this morning?
Well, I think a little bit better.
Good. That sounds
At the
very
Hillsborough
good.
Crisis Center in Tampa, volunteers and staffers call 240 elderly shut-ins every day just to chat.
They really need that call. It shows them that there's someone out here who cares, someone who's looking out for them.
But there are 26 million elderly people in the United States and not nearly enough volunteers to go around. Only 1 elderly person in 7 lives within reach of home health services.
The son just called me up. There they are, I'll tell you. He says, Pop, tomorrow we're taking you out for dinner.
But the problem is not just with the government. The scandal, one gerontologist said, is that we've created a society with so few alternatives for our old people that suicide can appear to be a rational option. Steve Croft, CBS News, Miami.
In Zanesville, Ohio today, authorities said a bus being used to train replacement Greyhound bus drivers ran over and killed a member of the striking union. 42-year-old Raymond Phillips was among some 50 demonstrators who gathered around the bus as it slowed for a stop sign. Details were unclear, and police said they didn't know if charges would be brought. 2 Supreme Court actions of note. The justices agreed today to rule whether young men applying for federal student aid or job training must prove first that they have complied with the military draft registration law. And in a ruling watched closely by American states and Western European states, the High Court let stand a controversial tax law, a California law that taxes the local subsidiary of the Dutch company Shell Petroleum based on the worldwide income of that multinational corporation.
America was born with a dream that says in this great land, each and every one of us has the opportunity to build a life that's rich and rewarding. At Prudential Bache Securities, we believe in that dream. We can show you how total financial planning can bring you a richer life for today and tomorrow. Call us. We're Prudential Bache Securities. America, bring us your future.
Over 1 million years ago, a single spark changed the world. There was fire, and the art of cooking was created. As that spark changed the past, Whirlpool ranges and microwave ovens can change your future. Each one has been specially designed to give you the 2 things you look for most in a new range or microwave oven: better meals, easy cleanups. And each range is backed by the same promise as our washers and refrigerators. The Whirlpool promise of good, honest quality that can make your world a little easier.
Say, this is the IBM Product Center, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Tell me, do you sell the IBM personal computer here?
Yes, we have...
And IBM typewriters and text processors?
Yes, we...
Now, I've got a wholesale business. Can you help me as it grows?
Well, certainly, IBM...
Can you help me with financing?
Of course, IBM...
You have IBM supplies and service, software, computer classes? In that case, do you mind if I ask you a question?
At the IBM Product Center, you get more than an IBM product. You get IBM.
Nicaragua claimed today that 2 aircraft flying from Honduras attacked a Pacific border port town, killing 2 persons. A Sandinista spokesman said the planes were camouflaged with special paint. 8 days ago, a Colombian jetliner crashed in Spain in a small town just outside Madrid, killing 181 people. While covering that story of tragedy, Richard Roth found another story, one of faith, a story that proves Robert Louis Stevenson's belief that mankind was never so happily inspired as when it made a cathedral.
For 18 years, Justo Gallego has been working as an architect, a foreman, a carpenter, and a mason, though he's had no formal training in any of those jobs, and he earns no salary. No one told him to go to work. The idea just came to him, and so he began. He began to build a cathedral. And for 18 years, without vacation, he's been doing it by hand, mostly by himself, selling off small pieces of family land in a small town near Madrid. Do you know anything about building?
¿Sabe algo de construcción?
No.
We are farmers, says Gallego, and if his cathedral lacks the elegance of Bramante or the artistry of Michelangelo, that doesn't seem to matter. He's doing this to honor God, he says, and claims he's blessed with natural skills that serve him better than fancy tools. His building material is mostly broken brick that's been abandoned, and his style is mostly individual. And while he occasionally has amateur help, over 18 years he's grown used to doing things his way, alone, and he encourages assistants to understand that. In another 4 years, Gallego says, the work will be finished, and then he wants to take a trip. Painters and sculptors have promised to decorate his cathedral, but no one has offered him any bells, and he's heard they are expensive. He can't build them, so he plans to go to Rome and record the sounds of famous bells. He'll bring the tape here to play in his cathedral, and he says with conviction it will then be something of great beauty. Richard Roth, CBS News, Mejorada del Campo, Spain.
And that's the CBS Evening News for this Monday. Dan Rather reporting from New York. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
The West has always been a place where a man went to prove himself. This spirit has been captured in Chaps, the cologne by Ralph Lauren. Chaps isn't just for men who ride horses. It's for men everywhere who are strong and proud, who are living their lives with a feeling of independence. Chaps, the cologne by Ralph Lauren, the spirit of the West that's everywhere today.
These days, everyone's got some kind of telephone deal for you. But how can I beat a deal like the AT&T phone right here in my home? Works great, rings true, not a lick of trouble. I called AT&T's toll-free number and found out I don't have to do anything to keep old reliable right here. I can keep on leasing it or buy it. You know, you may already have your hands on the best telephone deal in town.
AT&T, we set the standards.
Now there's a way to make each day a fruitful one. Enter the world of new Kellogg's Fruitful Bran. Fruitful Bran is a high-fiber cereal that's a feast of raisins, dates, apples, and golden honey. Here's fiber made delicious. Discover the bountiful taste of new Kellogg's Fruitful Bran and make every brand new day more fruitful.
I'm Bill Curtis. Tomorrow, fashion superstar Yves Saint Laurent. And in our 8:30 half hour, Donald Sutherland. Wake up to what's happening on the CBS Morning News.
This is CBS.